In the neon-lit streets of Hong Kong in 2023, citizens are living peaceful and prosperous lives. Office worker Aisha is out shopping with her sister when a rude man suddenly bumps into people as he passes by. Just as Aisha is about to curse him out, she turns around and is shocked to see a massive wave approaching. She regrets not running away with the man earlier. However, blaming herself like this is really unnecessary. In such a massive tsunami, can one ultimately survive? In fact, the moment you see the waves, your location already determines half of your chances of survival, while the other half depends on whether you have the protagonist's aura. Aisha, waking up from the nightmare, is of course our protagonist. Her younger sister disappeared in the terrifying waves 5 years ago, leaving only a necklace for her older sister. Living in a post-apocalyptic world, Aisha no longer has the experience of tidying up her room. Food is the most precious thing these days. Aisha has survived until today, seemingly just for food. Besides eating, Aisha's biggest pastime now is to look at Hong Kong transformed into a land of water, where the former prosperity and order have vanished and the damaged buildings resemble reeds in a pond. The only way to receive information from the outside world is through a treasured radio, and the sound cannot be played out loud. If it attracts strangers, the bad news will far outweigh the good. No one will give away supplies, but many will resort to robbery. For this reason, Aisha never pays attention to the survivor camp broadcasts. They say there is food and housing, but once you enter the camp, aren't you just at their mercy? At least by scavenging through trash and collecting rainwater and dew, Aisha can barely get by. Hong Kong has an average annual rainfall of over 2,000 millimeters, so as long as it's not winter, it's manageable. However, every time she eats instant noodles, Aisha still reminisces about the days of feasting on fish and meat. That kind of life and the collapsing building. Those days are gone forever. Fortunately, there are still small families surviving simply in the buildings, but what Aisha cares about most are the goods in the water. You can see her hanging elastic cords on the four corners of the window frame, using a homemade slingshot to shoot a steel fork right into the foam box on the water's surface. However, the unknown creatures in the water won't let Aisha easily find treasures. After the storm, there are always these strange fish in the seawater that catch live creatures. Fortunately, after 5 years of training, Aisha is quite strong, and finding some fine wine is a rare blessing these days. But today, the unluckiest thing was accidentally getting injured. Aisha uses a sip of wine to disinfect and another to drown her sorrows. Truly unsure of what she's living for, if it's about the scarcity of supplies and the harsh living conditions, one can endure and get through it. But the screams that occasionally come from afar and the marauders who travel by boat to commit atrocities are truly a nightmare. Aisha, looking around nervously, was unfortunately spotted and had to face them head-on, which was impossible. So she quickly made her move. She destroyed traces of life in the building and buried her footprints. The secret behind the wardrobe served as Aisha's hiding place. Just as she hid, the marauders arrived with their leader, searched everywhere with their underlings, but found nothing. Aisha thought everything was fine, but suddenly a gunshot rang out. It turned out a boy was practicing shooting there. The more dangerous the situation, the more Aisha missed her sister, but the sea had swallowed everything, leaving only pain. Aisha had nothing but a necklace, facing endless days of hardship. The sewers were long useless, and sanitation relied on seawater for purification. If lucky enough, one might even salvage quite a bit of goods. Even a can of honey would be enough to make someone happy for half a day. Of course, corpses would also drift in with the tide. Death was unremarkable today, but when Aisha went back to her room to cook instant noodles, she overlooked something. The little girl hadn't actually died. She was just pretending to be dead to cross the sea, and was scavenging for food in the survivors' homes. Although Aisha had heard noises 2 or 3 times, her previous vigilance had completely vanished, until the girl's footsteps gave her away. Using soap to lure the target, she caught the intruder red-handed, but Aisha underestimated the girl's skills, and even more so her courage. Only the mysterious room at the end of the hallway made the intruder hesitate. This room held Aisha's secret, and even she hadn't entered it again. The biggest problem now was that the food was dwindling day by day. Just as Aisha was about to confront the girl, she saw the young sleeping face. She was reminded of her own sister, and decided to cook another bowl of noodles. It was just like the saying, "Are you hungry? I'll cook a bowl of noodles for you." But in the ruins of the city today, happiness was almost out of reach. Aisha sharing instant noodles with the girl was an act of overwhelming kindness, but unfortunately, the girl with the opera mask was not very polite, unlike her sister on her birthday back then. Not only did she know to thank her sister for the gift, but she even received the family heirloom necklace. Aisha was furious with her biased parents at the time, yet fate played its tricks, and the necklace eventually found its way back to her. The girl eating the noodles didn't know the kind person had such a story, but she was grateful and reciprocated to the noodle cooking chef, and thus the two became acquainted. The last time Aisha laughed so happily was at the vibrant Victoria Harbour. where reminiscing was too exhausting and sleeping was more comforting. The girl who got separated from her parents now also has her own bed tonight. Her name is Axie, and she is even younger than Aisha's sister who perished. It was truly fortunate that she survived the tsunami and wasn't slammed against the walls by the torrent. However, Axie was not familiar with Aisha's life. Unintentionally, she locked the rooftop iron door by removing the colored tape which left Aisha in a panic. How would they get back? But for the resourceful Axie, opening a door with a wire was not a problem. But behind this small accident, a trust crisis was revealed. Aisha could overlook the food, but if Axie took the necklace too, that would be going too far. And as the saying goes, when it rains, it pours. Raiders were also ransacking the area at this time. Aisha and Axie witnessed a brutal scene, uncertain of how much longer they could live peacefully. The conflict between them erupted due to the disappearance of the necklace. Aisha actually had no evidence that Axie took the necklace, but the missing bucket from the rooftop was indeed used by Axie to clean the room. The suddenly well-behaved girl instantly reminded Aisha of her younger sister, who, in their mother's eyes, was the most sensible. On the other hand, Aisha, who was always out having fun, not finding a good husband and becoming a virtuous wife who supports her husband and educates her children, was what truly worried the family. Even today, Aisha can still feel the profound meaning of these words, but after the disaster, people no longer even have the chance to blame each other. The secrets of that family were also sealed at the end of the corridor. Aisha only advised Axie not to go into that very smelly room. It was the room where 5 years ago she heard the weather warning and learned that Indonesia and the Philippines were hit by a tsunami. It was the room where she refused her parents' request to visit relatives during the Qingming festival, leading to a fallout with her mother. Axie did not understand her sister's feelings, did not understand why her sister still stayed outside the house, and did not understand why, despite the radio announcing survivor camps, Aisha did not build a raft. It was only after leaving this place of trouble that Aisha realized. Axie, who had been collecting plastic bottles, intended to cross the sea to find a survivor base. However, they didn't have enough food, and once they left, it would be difficult to return, not to mention the various dangers along the way. The flare gun the girl found was not only ineffective at repelling enemies, but also risked exposing their location to raiders. Moreover, many problems cannot be solved just by leaving home, and Aisha understood this very well. As long as the rain could still bring fresh water, and as long as there was still uneaten food in the ruins, there was no reason to leave easily. The outside world might be exciting, but such excitement was not the main thread of life. Aisha was quite content to have found someone who wasn't a killer to accompany her in this chaotic world, and the necklace Aisha had been looking at under her pillow was finally recovered, perhaps because she had wronged the girl, or perhaps because Aisha felt a sense of guilt in reconciling with her past. Finally, they decided to start making a raft, seeking the possibility of heading towards a new life. Archie couldn't believe it. He truly had hope of crossing the sea. But there were still too many unknowns on this journey. Just like the night Aisha took her sister home, the two were merely passing by the street when they were nearly hit by a man. The sister was about to curse him out, only to realize the man was from the previous team, and behind him was a massive tidal wave. That disaster destroyed everything, leaving Aisha, who survived alone, to soak in sorrow for 5 years. After much thought, Aisha decided to return the necklace to the other sister. Although she was not the same person, she had the same lovely soul. The two sisters made thorough preparations for the journey, as the survivor camp, though far, was still within Hong Kong. However, at this moment, Archie's headphone jack got caught on something, causing the radio speaker to blare loudly in the quiet ruins, almost scaring the souls out of them. Fortunately, the night passed without incident. Before any new looters arrived to ransack, the raft needed to be assembled quickly, and reconnaissance work before departure was essential to ensure there were no dangers nearby. Once discovered by looters, the raft would have no means of defense, and there is no absolutely safe hiding place in the world that can guarantee survivors perpetual safety. The worst case scenario was indeed the looters coming to the ruins. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Archie quickly joined Aisha, erasing all traces of their presence on the entire floor, and hiding all valuable supplies. And most importantly, was the hiding place behind the wardrobe, which must not be discovered. Unfortunately, this time the looters were no longer doubtful passers-by, but rather vengeful villains. Aisha understood that the intruders had ill intentions, and the best hiding place could only be reserved for her sister. Archie realized that her sister intended to sacrifice herself, and she was extremely reluctant in her heart. But Aisha wanted to tell her sister that if they hadn't encountered this, neither of them would want to live. The foul-smelling room at the end of the corridor was also a hiding place. Our raft was already prepared, and no one would give up. We were determined to survive until the day of departure. However, all of this depended on Aisha being able to evade capture. The leader of the pursuers was determined this time. No matter which room the target hid in, she would go to any length to catch the woman. Enduring the overwhelming stench, Aisha could only pray that her parents would bless her. Success or failure depended on them. The raiders didn't know what trick the target was playing. They just violently searched every corner. Deception was no longer useful. They knew someone was there. The leader even came to the end of the corridor and kicked open the door to the room where Aisha was hiding. But as soon as he entered, he was hit by an astonishing stench. However, someone capable of being the boss is not an ordinary person. He covered his mouth and nose and began to search the room. When he lifted the white cloth in front of him, he encountered two highly decomposed corpses. The panicked leader's stomach churned violently, and he began to vomit profusely. Aisha narrowly escaped disaster, just like 5 years ago, when the sudden storm forced bystanders into a dead end. Apart from those who fled ahead of the flood, there was no second thought. Driven by the instinct to survive, Aisha simply dragged her sister up the stairs. And now, her sister, hiding behind the wardrobe, was also enveloped in danger. Sometimes, the most troublesome thing is not the adults, but the boys who look around restlessly can also be quite difficult. The defeated leader originally didn't pay much attention to the wardrobe until the boy pointed out the news that Aisha least wanted to hear. But he understood that going out to save people now would only be courting death. The tragedy from 5 years ago must not happen again. Back then, Aisha, who was half a step ahead of the crowd, desperately fled to higher ground to escape the flood, unaware that her sister couldn't keep up. The girl with the sprained ankle was eventually left behind by Aisha and was gradually overtaken by the surging crowd behind her, and the panicked people fleeing for their lives couldn't care less if there were children underfoot. Although Aisha was ultimately the winner, and she became the only survivor of the building by escaping to the rooftop, the necklace that lost its owner, like the surging waves outside the rooftop, imposed an indelible pain on this disaster-stricken city. Fortunately, history will not repeat itself, because Aisha is hiding under the white cloth. After being identified by the new sister with a flash of a flashlight, Aisha was still discovered by the looters for stealing faces, and they were very satisfied with their spoils. This was all thanks to Arshi. When the knocked-out Aisha woke up, her hands and feet were already tied, and the impatient members of the looters hadn't seen other women for a long time. If it weren't for the leader needing manpower for an assassination today, she wouldn't have been able to escape, and the idea of making a raft to flee would have been even more delusional. But even so, Aisha didn't want to blame her sister. Wanting to survive is not wrong, but it's more important to live well. Aisha took advantage of the guards' unpreparedness, sneaking behind to find a certain tool. Although she was pulled back by an incredibly strong man, she managed to grab a broken CD during the struggle. Aisha then took the opportunity to strike the enemy and subsequently retrieved the crucial tool. Kai Chu probably couldn't figure out until his death how a flare gun emerged from the water, but in the dazzling red light he was no longer a threat. The raiders, alarmed by the unusual situation, immediately turned back to capture the slaves, determined to make Aisha pay the price. But the first to gain something was the chubby guy at the end of the team. However, like his predecessors, the chubby guy made the mistake of underestimating the enemy. Aisha grabbed the guitar beside her and fiercely smashed it against the fallen chubby guy until the snow water made her stop, and she seized a dagger, then focused on another isolated criminal. The sudden broadcast was the perfect bait, and the criminal, holding a knife, entered the room, falling right into Aisha's trap, although he was still able to counterattack after being ambushed. The wound on his back also hindered his strength, and even if he could knock Aisha down, it was too late. The dagger pulled from his upper back ultimately gave Aisha an opportunity to strike. It's not about who shouts the loudest, but who lands the blow that determines the winner. In her berserk state, Aisha would no longer allow the enemy to go out and commit evil. And the next lucky target was the newcomer who walked into the furnace without caution simply because of a missed attack. He gave Aisha the perfect opportunity to pour oil on his back. Urgently arriving was another big gift from the opponent. The newcomer was hit by the furnace, and his escape route was blocked. Aisha thus moved amidst the criminal's screams, while the opponent struggled incessantly in the blazing fire, illuminating Aisha's path forward. If it were an ordinary leader, upon hearing of the successive tragic deaths of subordinates, they would surely gather people to act together. But today's leader was uniquely determined to personally deliver the fatal blow to the prey. However, its combat strength was indeed the strongest among the marauders. Even after being ambushed by Aisha and falling due to an ankle injury, it could continue fighting, even managing to knock the prey unconscious at one point. Facing such a vast disparity in strength, Aisha was almost at her wit's end, having to make use of whatever she could find at hand. Seeing the light tube being pulled down by the desperate Aisha, the sound of shattering glass echoed in the darkness, mixed with a few screams from above. Thus, the most difficult battle came to an end. The little boy who came to support had a gun, but his shooting skills were nothing to boast about. he shouted as he chased Aisha, who ran all the way up to the rooftop, only to be locked outside the door. Aisha originally didn't want to harm the child and almost felt a pang of compassion. It wasn't until the gunfire resumed that the boy realized he had misjudged Aisha, who was wreaking havoc. In the blink of an eye, only one target remained. The boatman was still unaware of what had happened inside the house until Aisha assembled a homemade slingshot and drew it to its maximum tension. Only then did he become alarmed as something flew past him. Although Aisha didn't hit the target, she provided Ashi with the opportunity to act. Seeing the two, one big and one small, fall into the sea, Aisha quickly jumped into the water to save them. The struggling boatman clearly forgot about the monstrous fish in the water. While the calm Aisha managed to rescue the girl, she didn't want to blame Ashi for once betraying them, because when faced with only bad options, people simply have no better choice. They survived, and that is what matters most. Later on, Aisha no longer had to worry about the raft. She became the captain and took in the plunder from the raiders. Was there truly a safe haven at the survivor camp mentioned on the radio? She no longer pondered over it, but instead, with hope, she and her sister sailed towards the distant dreamland. The end. The story beyond the calm comes to an end, so let's switch to Arthur's world and take a look. Although at the end of the film, Aisha and Axie set sail on a long voyage, the safety of the survivor camp mentioned on the radio is indeed worrisome. In such a chaotic world, there are probably only two possibilities for a camp broadcasting to the outside. One is that the camp itself is a scam, using the broadcast to capture passers-by as slaves. The other is that the camp is strong and orderly, unafraid of marauders roaming around. What awaits Aisha and Axie? If you had to choose, would you stay in the ruins or make other plans? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section. Alright, today's journey ends here. Assaul is off to develop new heroes for everyone. Oh, don't forget to like and follow us. See you at the next destination. So,